"Where's my $2,000, scumbag?" Detective Morrison snarled, slamming Raphael against the brick wall behind Tony's corner store. His two backup officers laughed, blocking any escape route. "You pay tonight, or you're going back to prison for drug possession." The setup had been months in the making. Morrison had carefully selected his target after Raphael's release from Riverside Correctional, a quiet ex-con with no family support, no connections, and no one who would miss him if he disappeared back into the system. The perfect victim for a predator in uniform. Rafael Santos, 34, had been released just 6 months ago after serving 3 years for a crime he never committed. His only mistake? Being in the wrong place at the wrong time when Morrison needed a scapegoat to close his case numbers and impress his superiors with quick arrests. "Detective, you know I don't have that kind of money," Raphael replied calmly, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Janitor work doesn't pay that much." Morrison burst into laughter, adjusting the gun in his holster with theatrical menace. At 45, he'd controlled the East Side district for a decade through corruption and extortion. His expensive watch, designer sunglasses, and luxury car payments were all funded by bleeding money from the vulnerable people he was supposed to protect. To him, ex-cons were nothing but cash cows, an endless source of easy money with no legal recourse. Then figure it out, piece of trash. Sell a kidney, borrow it, do whatever it takes. Morrison stepped closer, his whiskey breath flooding Raphael's face. The detective's bloodshot eyes revealed years of alcohol abuse and moral decay. "You have until Friday, or I plant a baggie of coke in your apartment and send you back to the cage where you belong." Behind Morrison, Officers Bradley and Martinez exchanged uncomfortable glances. They'd seen this routine dozens of times, their corrupt supervisor shaking down former inmates who couldn't fight back. Neither had the courage to report it, knowing Morrison controlled their careers and pension futures. Raphael nodded silently, lowering his head in apparent submission. But something in his eyes changed, a cold gleam that Morrison didn't notice, too drunk on his own power to recognize danger. This wasn't the first time Raphael had seen uniformed men abusing their authority. 5 years in Army Special Forces had taught him to recognize predators, manipulators, and cowards hiding behind badges. The tragic irony was that Raphael had once respected law enforcement. Before his wrongful conviction, he'd actually considered joining the police force after his military service ended. He'd believed in justice, in protecting the innocent, in using strength to defend the weak. Morrison's corruption had poisoned that idealism completely. "Friday," Raphael repeated softly, his voice carrying undertones that Morrison was too arrogant to detect. "Understood." The 3 officers walked away laughing, Morrison bragging loudly about his boat payment being covered by community donations. They had no idea they'd just threatened a man who'd survived Taliban ambushes, cartel firefights, and 3 years of prison violence through pure tactical intelligence. As their patrol car disappeared around the corner, Raphael remained motionless in the alley for several minutes. His mind was already processing information he'd been quietly collecting for months. Morrison's schedules, his routes, his vices, his gambling debts, his affair with a city councilman's wife, his offshore bank accounts. Every weakness catalogued and documented. What the corrupt detective didn't know was that Raphael had been a sergeant in classified missions in Afghanistan, specialized in urban combat, psychological warfare, and survival tactics. His wrongful conviction had been orchestrated by Morrison himself 3 years ago, when Raphael witnessed the detective taking a briefcase full of cash from known drug dealers behind a warehouse. Raphael had tried to report it through proper channels, but Morrison's network of corruption reached deep into the system. Within hours of filing his report, Raphael found himself arrested on fabricated drug charges, with planted evidence and perjured testimony from Morrison's informants. Walking home under the dim streetlights, Raphael allowed himself a cold smile for the first time in months. Those men thought they were dealing with just another broken, desperate ex-con trying to survive on the streets. Little did they know that every threat, every humiliation, every display of corrupt power was only feeding a force that had been sleeping for 3 long years. Morrison had made the fatal mistake of backing a trained killer into a corner. And when that force finally awakened, the detective would discover that some lions prefer to disguise themselves as sheep, until they get close enough to strike with precision that would make his military instructors proud. If you're enjoying this story of justice and revenge, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of underdogs who refuse to stay down. The harassment began immediately the next morning with Morrison's patrol car parked outside Raphael's apartment building when he left for work at 5 a.m. The message was crystal clear: you're being watched, hunted, and there's nowhere to hide. At the bus stop, Morrison rolled down his window and grinned maliciously, enjoying the psychological torture. Tick-tock, trash. 3 days left, he called out, loud enough for other waiting passengers to hear and stare. Hope you're not thinking about running. We know where you live, where you work, who you talk to, what time you brush your teeth. The other commuters quickly distanced themselves from Raphael, fear spreading like a contagion. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone the police were targeting. Morrison's reputation for destroying anyone who crossed him was legendary in the neighborhood. Raphael's job at Metropolitan Office Complex had been his lifeline since release from prison. 8 months of showing up early, working late, never complaining, never asking for special treatment. His supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind 50-year-old woman with 3 kids, had grown to trust him with building security codes, after-hours access, and even her personal office keys. It was honest work that kept him grounded and gave him purpose. That afternoon, Morrison appeared at Raphael's workplace like a dark cloud, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, uniform perfectly pressed to project maximum authority. He found Mrs. Henderson in her cramped office and sat down uninvited, spreading his legs wide and leaning back in the chair like he owned the place. "Ma'am, I need to inform you about your employee, Rafael Santos. He's been seen associating with known drug dealers in his neighborhood, meeting with gang members at suspicious hours." Morrison's voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being believed without question, his lies flowing smoothly after years of perfecting them. "We've got him under surveillance. Just thought you should know, for security purposes and the safety of your other employees." Mrs. Henderson's face paled as her trust in Raphael evaporated instantly. The man she'd grown to respect as honest and hardworking was suddenly transformed into a potential threat. I had no idea. Thank you for informing me, Detective. What should I do?" Morrison leaned forward with fake concern. "Well, I can't tell you how to run your business, but if it were my building, I'd be very careful about who has access to sensitive areas after hours. You've got expensive equipment here, confidential files, employee personal information." When Raphael arrived for his evening shift, the atmosphere had completely changed. Mrs. Henderson avoided eye contact, her friendly greetings replaced by nervous nods. His access codes had been revoked without explanation. His locker was being searched by building security while he watched helplessly. Other employees whispered behind his back and stared like he was a dangerous animal in a cage. The message was devastating and crystal clear. Even here, in the only place where he'd found respect and stability, Morrison's reach could destroy everything he'd painstakingly rebuilt from nothing. But Raphael had survived much worse than corrupt cops and their psychological warfare. During his 3rd deployment in Kandahar province, he'd watched his entire 8-man squad get wiped out by a sophisticated IED ambush while he was providing overwatch from a rooftop 200 meters away. For 3 days and nights, he'd evaded Taliban search parties, surviving on collected rainwater and his advanced military training, before reaching the extraction point where helicopters could evacuate him. The military psychologist who debriefed him later wrote in her classified report that Raphael possessed unusual psychological resilience under extreme duress, and exceptional tactical thinking under life-threatening pressure. These weren't just words in a file, they were survival skills that 3 years in prison had only sharpened. That night, Raphael sat in his modest 1-bedroom apartment, looking at a framed photograph he kept hidden in his sock drawer. His daughter Sophia, now 8 years old, whom he hadn't seen or spoken to since his wrongful imprisonment began. Morrison hadn't just stolen 3 years of his life, he'd stolen his chance to watch his little girl grow up, to help with homework, to tuck her in at night, to be the father she deserved. His ex-wife Maria had remarried a successful accountant and moved across the country to start fresh, away from the shame and scandal of being associated with a convicted drug dealer. The dozens of letters Raphael had written from prison had all been returned unopened, marked "Return to Sender, Addressee Unknown." His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "Pay up tomorrow or your boss learns about the drugs we found in your locker during tonight's search. Your choice, convict." Raphael stared at the threatening message for a long moment, his jaw tightening with controlled fury. Then he deleted it and walked to his closet, reaching behind his winter coats to retrieve something he'd hoped never to touch again. His fingers found the small duffel bag containing items from his past life as a soldier. Inside the bag, classified tactical manuals from his army days, detailed maps of the police precinct downloaded from public records, surveillance photographs he'd been secretly taking of Morrison's daily routine for weeks, and a small digital recorder that had been capturing every interaction with the corrupt detective. What Morrison saw as a broken ex-con scrambling to survive was actually a trained intelligence operative who'd been conducting a methodical surveillance operation. The predator had no idea he'd been stalking a hunter who'd been watching him right back, documenting every crime, every abuse of power, every constitutional violation. The beautiful irony was that while Morrison thought he was breaking Raphael down day by day, he was actually providing the evidence that would eventually destroy his entire criminal enterprise. And tomorrow, when Morrison came to collect his blood money, he discovered that some prey refuse to run when cornered. They turn around and show their teeth instead, with the calculated precision of someone trained to eliminate threats to national security. Friday morning arrived with Morrison's patrol car honking aggressively outside Raphael's building at dawn. The detective stepped out, adjusting his belt with theatrical authority, knowing the neighbors were watching from their windows. "Time's up, convict!" Morrison shouted, his voice echoing through the courtyard. "Where's my money?" Raphael emerged from the building empty-handed, his shoulders slumped in apparent defeat. "I don't have it, detective. I lost my job yesterday because of what you told my boss." Morrison's grin widened with sadistic satisfaction. "Well, well. Looks like you're going back to your cage then." He pulled out his handcuffs, making a show of the arrest. "Boys, search his apartment. I'm sure we'll find something interesting." But as Morrison's backup officers headed toward the building, Raphael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled, the first genuine smile Morrison had seen from him. "Actually, detective, there's someone who wants to meet you." Raphael nodded toward a black sedan that had just pulled up. A woman in a sharp business suit emerged, carrying a briefcase and a federal badge. "Detective Morrison?" Agent Sarah Chun, FBI Internal Affairs, approached with purposeful strides. "I'm here about your extortion racket." Morrison's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." Agent Chun opened her briefcase, revealing a laptop and recording equipment. Funny thing about modern technology. Hidden cameras are so small these days. She pressed play on an audio file. Morrison's own voice filled the air. "Where's my $2,000, scumbag? You pay tonight, or you're going back to prison for drug possession." The corrupt detective's jaw dropped. His backup officers stepped away, suddenly very interested in their shoes. Morrison's world was crumbling in real time, and he couldn't understand how. "You see," Raphael spoke calmly, his military posture returning, "while you thought you were hunting a helpless ex-con, you were actually being hunted by someone who spent years in Army intelligence. Every conversation, every threat, every illegal move you made, all recorded." Agent Chun had been Raphael's contact since his release. She believed his story about Morrison's corruption from day one, but needed evidence. Raphael had spent 6 months gathering that evidence, wearing hidden recording devices, documenting the systematic extortion of dozens of former inmates. Morrison lunged toward Raphael in desperate rage, but found himself face-to-face with a man whose military reflexes had never dulled. Raphael sidestepped effortlessly, causing Morrison to stumble and fall onto the concrete. "The beautiful thing about patience," Raphael said, looking down at the detective who destroyed so many lives, "is that it lets you watch your enemies destroy themselves while thinking they're winning." As Agent Chun cuffed Morrison, she revealed the scope of the investigation. "We've been tracking your operation for months, detective. 19 former inmates have come forward. Your 2 partners have already flipped and are testifying against you." Morrison's empire of corruption was collapsing faster than he could process. His pension, his reputation, his freedom, all gone in the span of 5 minutes. But Raphael wasn't finished yet. The real surprise was still coming, and when Morrison learned the full extent of what Raphael had orchestrated, he'd realized that underestimating a Special Forces veteran had been the biggest mistake of his criminal career. As Agent Chun led Morrison toward the federal vehicle in handcuffs, the corrupt detective's rage exploded into desperate panic. "This is all fake. He's a convicted felon. You can't trust anything he says." But Raphael pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal a comprehensive digital file. "Agent Chun, show him the rest." The screen displayed Morrison's bank records, offshore accounts containing over $400,000 in extortion money. real estate purchases under fake names, text message threads with drug dealers, photos of Morrison meeting with known criminals in back alleys. It wasn't just 6 months of evidence. Raphael had been building this case for 3 years, even from inside prison. You want to know what I really did during those long nights you thought I was crying myself to sleep? Raphael's voice carried the cold precision of a military briefing. I studied you. Every corrupt deal, every dirty cop in your network, every politician you paid off. I memorized your entire operation. Morrison's face went white as Agent Chun revealed the scope of the federal investigation. Detective, 19 of your victims have testified. We have recorded confessions from your 2 partners. Your captain has been cooperating with us for 8 months. Your entire precinct is under federal oversight. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Morrison had spent years destroying innocent lives, confident that his badge made him untouchable. Now he faced federal racketeering charges, conspiracy, extortion, and civil rights violations. His pension was frozen. His house was seized. His wife had filed for divorce that morning after FBI agents showed her evidence of his crimes. But Raphael's masterpiece wasn't finished. He turned to the growing crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch Morrison's arrest. This man sent me to prison for 3 years for a crime I didn't commit. He stole 3 years of watching my daughter grow up. He destroyed dozens of families in this community through extortion and planted evidence. Morrison lunged forward desperately, breaking free from Agent Chen's grip for one moment. You destroyed my life, you piece of. But Raphael didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there with the calm confidence of a man who had already won completely. Morrison stumbled and fell again, his career, reputation, and freedom now just memories. No, detective, Raphael said quietly, helping Agent Chun restrain Morrison again. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure everyone could see who you really were. As the federal vehicle pulled away with Morrison inside, Raphael felt his phone buzz. A text from his ex-wife. Sophia saw the news. She wants to talk to her daddy. After 3 years of silence, his daughter's voice would finally reach him again. The corrupt cop who had stolen his family had inadvertently given them back to him through his own downfall. The neighborhood erupted in cheers. 19 families would finally see justice. A corrupt system had been exposed and dismantled. And Rafael Santos, the quiet janitor who everyone had underestimated, had proven that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply letting evil people destroy themselves while the world watches. 6 months later, Raphael stood in the marble lobby of Morrison Security Consulting, his own private investigation firm specializing in police misconduct cases and institutional corruption. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The office was located 2 blocks from the precinct where Morrison used to terrorize innocent people, in a building that had once housed the detective's favorite corruption meeting spot. The transformation was remarkable. Raphael's military bearing had returned completely, his confidence radiating through expensive suits that replaced the humble janitor uniforms. His receptionist, Maria Gonzalez, was a former victim of Morrison's extortion scheme who now earned more in a month than she used to make in 6 months of fear-induced payments. His phone rang constantly with calls from high-profile attorneys, investigative journalists, and desperate families seeking justice against corrupt officers across 3 states. The Morrison case had made Raphael a household name in law enforcement accountability circles, featured on national news programs and congressional testimony about police reform. His unique combination of military intelligence training and wrongful conviction experience made him uniquely qualified to understand both sides of the system's failures. Mrs. Henderson from his old job had personally called to offer Raphael his position back with a promotion to head of security and a salary triple what she'd originally paid him. She'd also publicly apologized at a community meeting, admitting her shame at how quickly she believed Morrison's lies. Raphael politely declined her offer but hired her nephew as his firm's IT specialist, showing the forgiveness that marked his character. His daughter Sophia, now 9, visited him every weekend in his new 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. The first time she'd run into his arms after 3 years of separation, both father and daughter had cried for 20 minutes straight. His ex-wife Maria had apologized tearfully, admitting she should have believed in his innocence and fought harder to maintain their family connection during his imprisonment. They weren't remarrying, too much damage had been done, but they'd found a peaceful co-parenting arrangement that put Sophia's well-being first. Maria's new husband, surprisingly, had become an ally, helping facilitate the healing process and even referring legal cases to Raphael's growing firm. Morrison's trial had been a media sensation that lasted 4 months and dominated local news coverage every single day. 23 federal counts including extortion, racketeering, civil rights violations, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The federal prosecutor described it as one of the most systematic and brazen corruption schemes in modern law enforcement history. Morrison received 18 years in federal prison, more time than Raphael had served for a crime he didn't commit. But the punishment extended far beyond prison walls. His pension was completely seized to pay restitution to his victims. His house, boat, luxury cars, and offshore bank accounts were all confiscated and auctioned off. His wife had filed for divorce on the day of his arrest, moved across the country with their children, and legally changed their last names to avoid the shame. Former colleagues who had once feared Morrison's power now refused to take his collect calls from prison. Even other inmates avoided him. Corrupt cops who prey on innocent people aren't popular in federal facilities, especially when their victims included military veterans and single mothers. The ripple effects of Raphael's investigation had been extraordinary. The FBI's expanded probe led to the arrests of 12 other officers, 2 judges, a city councilman, 3 bail bondsmen, and the police chief himself. Federal monitors were appointed to oversee the entire department. New civilian oversight procedures were implemented. A victim compensation fund was established. The community that had once lived in fear now had hope and actual justice. Agent Chun stopped by Raphael's office that afternoon with news that made his success even sweeter. Morrison tried to file his third appeal claiming prosecutorial misconduct and ineffective counsel, she said with satisfaction. The federal judge not only threw it out but added 6 months for filing frivolous motions. He's going to serve every single day of those 18 years. Plus the additional time. She also brought updates on Morrison's prison life that would have made Raphael smile if he were a vindictive person. The former detective had been placed in protective custody after multiple threats from inmates whose families he destroyed. He worked in the prison laundry for 23 cents an hour. His requests for early release programs had been repeatedly denied. His own children refused to visit or accept his letters. Raphael nodded calmly, the same composure he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. He'd learned long ago that true strength isn't about overpowering your enemies through violence. It's about outlasting them, outthinking them, and letting their own corruption destroy them while you build something meaningful and lasting. That evening, as Raphael tucked Sophia into bed during her weekend visit, she asked him the question that made everything worthwhile. "Daddy, why didn't you try to hurt the bad policeman back when he was hurting you?" "Sweetheart," he replied, kissing her forehead and tucking her favorite stuffed animal under her arm. "Revenge is when you try to hurt someone because they hurt you. But justice is when you make sure they can't hurt anyone else ever again. Daddy chose justice because it protects other families like ours." She thought about this for a moment, her young mind processing complex concepts. "So you're like a superhero, but instead of fighting with your fists, you fight with your brain?" Raphael laughed, the first completely joyful sound he'd made in years. "Something like that, princess. Something exactly like that." Morrison had tried to destroy Raphael, but ended up destroying himself and his entire criminal network. Raphael learned that the best revenge isn't returning the damage you've suffered. It's building a life so successful and meaningful that your enemy's attempts to hurt you become completely irrelevant. True justice doesn't require lowering yourself to their level. It requires rising so far above it that they can't reach you anymore, while using your success to protect others from the same injustice. The system that had failed Raphael was now working because he'd forced it to work, not through violence or vigilante justice, but through patience, intelligence, and unwavering moral integrity. If this story of perseverance and intelligent justice inspired you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove the quiet ones who think before they act are often the most dangerous opponents that bullies and corrupt authorities will ever face.